Welcome back to Simon White, the podcast at the crossroads of media, business, and politics, focused on East Asia. I'm Christian White, and joined, as always, by Mark Simon. Mark, please say hello.
Hey, how are you? How's it going today? Welcome back from Taiwan, by the way.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I was over there for a week. It was interesting. A lot has changed. A lot has stayed the same. You know, Taiwan is in competition, or was in competition, with Hong Kong and Japan to see who could stay closed the longest. Of course, China, I guess, will take the cake, still doing a zero COVID strategy. But it was interesting to be back. I know you've been back a number of times during the pandemic. I went with the group. It was with Secretary of State Pompeo, who went to Kaohsiung in the southern part of the country, the first official of his rank, former official, to get down there. And the idea was to get away from Taipei, to see businessmen who weren't purely just in politics, to see a little bit of the supply chain, at least the free world side of the supply chain. I got to say, it was... there's still some irritations that will continue even after the quarantine is done away with in a few weeks here, a couple weeks, which is the need to stay in quarantine hotels, which are actually kind of hard to find and pretty inconvenient. The fact that mask wearing, even outdoors, even on hot, muggy days, seems to be about 99.9%. Did you wear a mask outdoors when you were in Taiwan?
The problem I had is the advantage I have is I live up in Yangmingshan. So I live up on the mountain. So I can walk out my door and not wear the mask. You know what I'm saying? I walk around all the time, without the mask up around where I am, because I'm by myself. I hike and I walk around. I'm not wearing a mask when I go on a hike. And by the way, you don't have to if you're doing physical exercise. But it's stupid. It's just dumb. I mean, I left there, at the end of August, and I'm going back next week. It's dumb. I mean, you're sitting there, it's hot, it's sweaty, you're walking down the street, and they wear them. There is something, and it's Hong Kong's the same way, and same in China. And I was in Queens a little while ago, and it was the same there. There's something about basically the mask that doesn't bother, certain societies. And, that's what it is. And in Taiwan, I'm telling you, every time I complain about the mask, I openly admit it. People kind of look at me and saying, stop being such a prick. They don't mind it. They don't like it, but they don't complain about it. And it's just more compliant. There's just much more compliant. Japan's, a lot of people.
It's weird. Yeah, they say their government is is telling them to do this, and they're much less likely, I guess, than we are to question the government. But it's actually misinformation. I mean, wearing masks outdoors doesn't stop anything as far.
It's actually worse for you, and it's been horrible on the children. And the simple fact of the matter is, I will take a shot at President Tai. It's one of the things. I mean, it's one of the things that we have to look at. President, they've been forcing these kids to wear masks now in Taiwan for close to 3 years. We're coming up on 3 years, and the developmental is devastating. And when you talk to people who know about it, that's it. But then again, you've got there's not many kids there. You know what I'm saying? So, it's a small population, and children are not the priority there. That's a very sad thing to say, but it is one of the things I will say about Taiwan is children are not a priority of the society. No, I'm sure. Cut this clip and put it out. Mark Simon says no. In Taiwan, children are not a priority of the society. They are not. It's you've got a young society, very self-absorbed, very much into their own world. They come up with all the usual bullshit excuses for not having children. Oh, they cost too much. Oh, I don't want to lose my career, which is always my favorite one, to be honest with you, when young people say that to me. Oh, I don't want to damage my career. Yeah, like we're all about to be Buzz Lightyear going up into the stars and saving the world. You know what I'm saying? Or Dr. Salk invented polio. Polio. Most people are going to end up retiring. They're going to have a regular job. They're going to make some money, maybe go to Europe a couple of times. It's a job. It says that's what it is. But anyway, I'm rant and rave here. I want too much. I want to ask the big question. What do you think of Taiwan? I mean, what's their focus on China? What do you think they're looking at with China now?
It does seem the groups I spoke to, these would be more green, which has
Yeah.
nothing to do with European or American Green Party. As you know, it's the ruling Democratic Progressive Party. So these are the more skeptical of China people. That skepticism and concern continues to grow, and they look at things that President Biden has said, saying that the U.S. would come to their defense, but then to be backed off by the White House. One thing that did shock me was the senior or a person with a lot of experience in their national security bureaucracy saying that actually there is a contingent in the military that is soft on China. That you would think that the uniform guys would be the most skeptical, the most fearful of an invasion, the most demanding of more resources to deter an invasion. And in fact, there is sort of a contingent that thinks that no, China probably will never invade. No, it's bluster, sort of a KMT or blue view of the world, which sort of surprised me. And we have our politician Flagstaff and E-ring in contrast to our fighting admirals and generals. I hope we still have some of those left. Who knows? But it would surprise me to hear that about Taiwan. Did you ever heard that?
Yeah, I've heard that a lot of times. The Taiwan military is actually kind of a disaster in many of their things. So, for example, the first thing is like soft on China. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. The senior military, senior army in particular, is actually quite bad. The Air Force, not so bad because they're out there all the time. You know what I'm saying? I mean, most of your generals have they're flyboys. So they're a little bit better. Navy, okay, but no, there's a leftover contingent, probably in the generals and colonels level, who are KMTers, and they kind of view their job as, our job is to be here, and then we want this. But they also are strong believers that the U.S. will not come to their aid. That is long ago thought that. Now that's changed. That's changed in the last 4 or 5 years. But essentially, yes, there's a significant contingent in the military. Just like, to be perfectly honest with you, in the foreign ministry, we have to remember most of the people. If you had gone into the Taiwanese government up until 2000, you were probably, so you're in your 40s now, mid 50s. You're probably KMT. So they're still there. So, like what I'm saying, you've got a situation where the lieutenants, captains, and majors, they're all fine on this, but the older guys, no, they're bad. And that's also, we get a lot of, my God, the number of spies that the Chinese have is just phenomenal. The it's really, it's one of the reasons why when they would talk about getting the F-35, I was like, no way. Are you kidding? Who would give them the? I mean, the leaks that they've got inside them, and when you talk about why, you made some comments before about like the readiness of them, but no, I've heard a lot of that. That's not an uncommon thought process. And the other thing about the military is that I think we have to remember is they are the key opponents of a vivid and reactive civil defense. They do not want anybody armed. The military really opposes the civil defense stuff, the Army especially. They viciously oppose it. And I think the U.S. needs to do more about that, and civil society. Chai herself has messed up on that. She just needs to say, look, we're gonna order 40,000 M16s or 60,000, and we're going to pre-position them around the island. Then we're going to have you guys train with these small militias. The Army does not like it. They do not like it at all. So
Yeah. One other thing I noticed when I was there, and I think this is the Rupert Murdoch test for if a city is prosperous or not, is to look around and see the number of cranes. And there were one or two close to my hotel, but the city wasn't full of them. I mean, the city seems okay, and I saw Taipei and Tainan and Kaohsiung. But there is a consequence to taking nearly 3 years off from the world. First of all, the deep impact on children who will go through all of, say middle school without without ever going to class without a mask on. Maybe they don't even recognize their teachers without them. But also just in keeping people away, people who have a strong reason to go, and you've gone a number of times, still go. And of course, we're rooting for them to be successful. But this did not feel bubbly and energetic, and they've put so much of their so many of their chips on semiconductors. And if you look semiconductor, I mean, the big guys, they're still building fabs and things like that, but they are liquidating inventory. They are predicting a downturn. And as we've said before in this program, semiconductors are going to be just another boring piece of hardware pretty soon, I think. And, where does that leave Taiwan? One thing Pompeo said in his speech is that, trade is good. We should be in favor of more trade, all that. But think about ways to make life easier for expats. Can expats get checking accounts and insurance and credit ratings and all of the other things that are necessary, just sort of the boring but necessary parts of business? And they have work to do.
I would agree. I mean, so your sense was basically not a thriving economy, which is basically my sense there too. It's a place that's just getting by, you know, and that's a strong feeling of that. There's really no vibrancy there. Now, in fairness, that's the same feeling you get almost all over Asia. And the US was a little different in the last year where it just kind of took off. But it is, I think a lot of that has to do with also demographics. It's markedly an older society. And that's why I say they don't really care about children. But, Secretary Pompeo's point about expats, well, you've heard me that. I've beaten that drum a million times. You know what I'm saying? I just was down at Tech Road, New York today trying to get something. And they're going, oh, you have to have this notified. You'd have to have this notified by the Filipino embassy. So, in other words, it's like without even thinking twice about this. You know what I'm saying? They send you on this wild goose chase through other consulates, which everybody knows is going to be a pain in the ass. But just that it's just not there. They don't. I really am starting to believe the whole. I hate to say it. I'm not saying I agree with China on certain things, but there are certain countries that just make themselves uncompetitive, and it's my concern about Taiwan. Your point about about only being about chips, it's incredibly correct. I mean, they don't really have anything else. Certainly not finance, certainly not anything else. You know what I'm saying? I mean, they could be a world financial center. They said, well, the Chinese banks will come in. I said, well, you're not a member of WTO. You don't have to let them in. Just let the U.S. banks in there. You know what I'm saying? That's all you have to do. Just let the U.S. and the European banks operate like it. Let them run your banking system. Then see how much protection you have. Imagine if the top 10 banks in Taiwan, 7 of them were foreign banks, non-Chinese. You'd have a lot of clout. You know what I'm saying? A lot of places. If you could bring people into work in call centers, if you could do things. I'm not sure, we always forget this, that basically Taiwan is a left of center country when it comes to economics. And that's a problem in a global economy. They basically have been done well because a long time ago, somebody said those people are our friends, and Madam Chiang Kai-shek was all over New York City, you know what I'm saying, doing her magic. And they got to basically make radios and do all that fun stuff for us. But now, let's be honest, there's nothing there. Other than, I mean, I'm actually very pessimistic about their economy in terms of being vibrant. I think it'll always grow because it's next to China, and China will get back on track. I think, maybe not.
Yeah, moving across the straight west from Hong Kong, you have, from Taiwan, you have Hong Kong. What's going on there? They seem to have finally, these last 3 holdouts, not China, not the mainland, but Japan, Taiwan, and Hong Kong seem to have decided to kind of sort of rejoin the world now. So what drove that in Hong Kong?
Well, what drove it in Hong Kong was Taiwan. What drove it in Taiwan was Hong Kong. What drove it in Japan was both of those two. I mean, it was like fetal dumb, fetal D, and like, oh, we'll be first. We're opening before them. And it was like, I think somebody moved 2 days just to be not on the 15th. I mean, Hong Kong opens the 15th. Taiwan goes, we're opening the 13th. You know what I'm saying? It's just, it's a joke. The one thing that's very interesting about Hong Kong, and I say this, first of all, in early November, they're trying to do the Bring Back Hong Kong thing. In other words, Hong Kong reemerges in the world and everything like that. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to be trying to shit all over that. You know what I'm saying? For good reason, because they're not. You can't re-enter the world and have 1,000 political prisoners in jail. They seem to just not want to talk about these things. And here's the interesting thing. Hong Kong has now adopted the #1 Chinese foreign policy tool. Shut up. Anytime China gets a hard time about anything, it's shut up. You've insulted the Chinese people. You've insulted the Hong Kong people. Now it's we're working together. Look, we're going to see what's going to happen with some of these major Western banks if they show up. HSBC, Standard Chartered are already showing up. Apparently, Morgan Stanley is showing up. We have not heard from Goldman Sachs. I would think they probably will. Now, my personal belief is interacting with these people probably violates in spirit some of the Hong Kong sanctions. In other words, revitalizing, working with the financial secretary who's got sanctions on him. You know what I'm saying? I think dealing with them and promoting them, I think at least the spirit of financial sanctions are being violated. So we'll see. I'm sure somebody will say something about it. But Hong Kong's trying to relaunch. I don't think it happens. A financial center has to be vibrant. A financial center has to have a little Wild West to it. Believe it or not, Singapore has that. Not culturally, but in their financial markets. And they also have a stable rule of law where they are not cracking down on dissidents. Now, they probably would. They had to, but they're not. And I just don't see Hong Kong coming back. I mean, look, did you see recently we had two things that were very interesting. First of all, Chinese banks, I mean, China asked Western banks and people not to put out negative financial reports on China in the run up to Xi Jinping's
Oh, is that all it
coronation.
takes? Yeah. Can a
It's
U.S.
out.
company do that? And she's like,
It's out.
oh,
That's don't say anything bad. Well, in the old days, the only thing that would happen there, the pressure would be some guy saying, look, can you guys hold off on writing that China's a hellhole for a week? You know what I'm saying? So we can, actually, not lose all our business. And most people it'd be a commercial decision and that would be fine. But now in Hong Kong, you better not write it, because if you write it, maybe one of these quislings in Hong Kong is going to come after you, especially if you're a Hong Kong analyst. If you're not an American, if you're holding a Hong Kong passport. So basically, they've completely destroyed the credibility of analysis on China in the Hong Kong market, because it's like, and don't write it bad running up to this point. What they really mean is don't write anything bad ever. And the second thing is we had this bizarre thing where the Chinese Communist Party have asked all the foreign consulates for the schematics of their offices. They want all the offices. The FT broke the story. Primrose Royden broke this story the other day. They're asking for all the design, the layouts of the offices for the consulates. What?
that's very odd. Yeah, if you could have some fun by sending in some phony, like, oh, this is our armory,
That would be
this is
hilarious. That would be
our
hilarious.
jail cell, this is our gold bullion
Yeah. Yeah.
reserve. That's yeah, the weirdness just seems to continue there. As you point out, the local banks or local analysts who work for international banks have no credibility anymore. And if you look at the brain drain, I'm surprised it's not going faster. Bloomberg sort of did this thing where it says, oh, it'll take Singapore, is it 20 years to catch up in wealth? But that's, I think, the wrong way to look at it. Once the city starts to grow and you contrast it with one that's shrinking, compare Charlotte, North Carolina to Detroit in any time since 1970. And I'm sure at one point Detroit was wealthier, at least on paper, but sure didn't feel that way.
That's a really good point, Kristen. A lot of times people are looking for reasons to, say, oh, this can happen and that can happen. A lot of it's because they don't really like Singapore. You know what I'm saying? They're not fans of Singapore. And some people don't want to see a system like Singapore be rewarded. But the Singaporean system and the lesser of evils is a lesser evil than the Hong Kong system right now. But I do believe, people don't like to hear it, I firmly believe that there is not an opportunity for a financial center to grow as long as you've got basically what is martial law running around. I mean, that's really what they've got in Hong Kong. They're arresting the guys for playing ukuleles or whatever, and they're arresting people. They're arresting people for passing on things. They're looking for they're telling analysts not to write things. They're asking for the floor plans of consulates. Who's kidding who? And they're still, they still got all these draconian measures. Like, for example, they still have no live music. No live music venues. Still, if there's more than 6 people in the street standing together, you're probably going to get broken up by the cops, you know. And you know, if you wear the wrong stuff, if you have the wrong shirt, you're going to get stopped. And that doesn't happen in Singapore. It doesn't even happen in Dubai, you know. Kind of they tolerate a lot, you know. And I think that's the next thing, because their system has to keep clamping down. And so basically you're pushing down on a financial system that actually has to soar to really get going, you know. I mean, how can you be a short, can you run shorts on China based in Hong Kong, criticizing people all the time? You know what I'm saying? How do you short Chinese construction stocks, you know, when they're mad as hell about that?
Yeah, it might attract someone who wanted attention from the authorities. You know, I was surprised in Taiwan to hear some sort of, I'd say, guarded optimism about the Philippines. They have such bad relations. It's not necessarily their fault. It's the other government. So their military doesn't even really talk to the U.S. military, vice versa. When Air Force and Navy planes fly around Taiwan on surveillance missions, they don't bother communicating with Taiwan, even though Taiwan tries. Communications between Japan and Taiwan are almost nil as far as military to military or intelligence to intelligence. But with the Philippines, they seem a little bit optimistic that Bang Bang will be better than Duterte, and a little more skeptical of China. What do you think?
Well, old man Marcos was an anti-commie, and I actually used to smoke cigars with Bong at the Shangri-La. I was he'd probably remember me as the fat white American guy who kind of sat by himself, and every once in a while he'd walk over and he'd engage me in conversation. And you know, he's not that much older than, you know, he's, you know, less than 10 years older than me. Very interesting guy in many ways when you actually sit there and talk to him. Not stupid, not dumb. People always make that. I don't know what it is with, especially the left, where they basically have to find something with somebody and then immediately say this person's an idiot. You know what I'm saying? You know, it's like what they do to Liz Truss and what they do. There's this desire to just basically destroy the individual. Bong is not a dumb guy. My concern with Bong is he's not ruthless enough. That's my concern. He's kind of a rich kid. Duterte was actually pretty damn fierce, you know what I'm saying? But my concern with Bong is that he's a little bit more wild, but he is certainly more pro-American than Duterte was. Duterte hated Americans. I was warned of that personally when I was going up to see him one time, pulled aside and said, Simon, you talk way too much. This guy does not like Americans. Shake his hand, say hello, and move on. And it was it was very good advice. And I throughout the evening, the only people he wanted to talk to, because there was a couple of American guys there who were trying to talk to him, you know what I'm saying? And they were like, he was the mayor, then he was the mayor, the governor of and they were trying to talk to him. He wanted nothing to do with them, you know what I'm saying? But he talked to the Aussies and the Brits all day long. And you kind of the fruit guys, Dole and Del Monte, you know, they kind of learned that. You know, you had to have somebody else down there. Even the port and terminal guys down there knew he just didn't like Americans. We've had the guy sanctioned since the late '80s, by the way. Oh yeah, he was murdering people a long time ago. But the thing is that he's always been problematic. But Bong he's much more part of Manila society. I mean, there's kind of a myth that Marcoses are out of the loop. You ever seen Imelda walk through the peninsula or the Shangri-La or walk into a concert hall? Nobody's booing. You know what I'm saying? There's no boo. You know, it's not it. I mean, she's well received wherever she goes. You know.
Yeah, it was a strong comeback. I can't remember if she's still in the Senate, but she was for a while.
She was. I mean, that's the whole. You know, it's like, it is what it is. I mean, I used to know one of the Aquinos, not the president, and you know, you'd like somebody said the number of times that Corey would be someplace. She had her bodyguards, and she'd be sitting in the corner, and then all of a sudden there'd be a stir, and here comes Imelda. You know, everybody's, oh, Corey's just sitting over there. You know, and it's like, well, whatever, Corey. But as far as a decent person, Corey Aquino is a much more decent person. But I think the thing with the Philippines is, in my mind, first of all, it's a growing country. I mean, they're up to 120 million people now, and they're growing at 2 or 3% a year. But it's not crazy growth anymore. It's just the fact they in Indonesia, Malaysia, the only people having babies. I think the Philippines birth rate now is about 2.6, That's really that's the United States in 1970. It's not 5.8 or something like that. You know what I'm saying? Like people used to freak out, and it's dropping. And that 2.6 is actually still skewed quite a bit by some families having 4, 5, or 6 people. You know what I'm saying? Five or six children. Philippines is a valuable ally to the U.S., and the U.S. needs to do a better job. Obama ignored it. We actually insulted them quite a bit. I know one of the presidents, and after she left office, she's not a stupid person. She went to Gloria went to Georgetown, and she's from Pampanga, my wife's province, and my wife's her mother always loved my wife because they're same province people, and would ask about my wife too. And Gloria told me a couple of times that you know really the U.S. went out of their way a little bit to kind of ignore the Philippines. And I thought that was really quite bad. That has a lot to do with our foreign service, too. Have you ever met a Filipino specialist? You got all the sinologists, you got all the guys who love Japan, the guys who love Burma, Thailand. Nobody really likes the Philippines. In all honesty, there's very few people who make a career based on the Philippines. It's not. It's just not. There's really no. That's because there's so much. They're so like us. You know what I'm saying? And the problem we had is that Bush largely ignored them, did not do a good job with them. Obama did not do a good job with them at all. Trump, in fairness to Pottinger and Stilwell, they probably showed the Philippines more attention than everybody else. And I think Eli Ratner and some other people are continuing that because they're seeing the value of the Filipinos.
Yeah. Yeah, if you look at the map of Asia, I mean, we used to have the army there from 1899 until there was a brief interruption from 1941 to 1944. And then again until we got kicked out in 92. It's a logic. I mean, even if we don't need giant naval bases, and it seems like we don't anymore since a single ship has far more capabilities. And the idea that you need a base with 30,000 guys walking around who are on shore leave just doesn't really make as much sense as it used to. It costs a lot. But the idea that you put the army somewhere, if you were going to plus up forces in the Pacific, take forces out of Germany or out of the States and put it out there, or move them to South Korea, where I'm convinced they would be useless in a contingency with China. South Koreans will sort of figure out who's calling. Oh, sorry, the phone line doesn't really work. Can't quite hear you. Can you call us back next week? The Philippines might be a logical place to, if you're not going to put things in Taiwan, if you don't want to put all the eggs in Japan's basket. But it seems like we're a long way from that. But maybe
I think so.
maybe
I think we're still a long way from it. Look, I'm one of these ones that think the best thing that ever happened in our relationship long term with the Philippines is we got out, because I was actually part of the pullout, down there, and quite frankly, it was a mess. But if we were still there, you have to have the knowledge of what happened earlier. You know what I'm saying? Everything in the Philippines was basically America's fault, America's input. God knows we had people that couldn't keep their hands out of anything. You know what I'm saying? I mean, one of the most atrocious things that ever happened there that I learned about that hasn't been written about was Hewlett Packard when they were doing the birth control there. They were putting the IUDs in the women's arms, and that was an American sponsored program. And it's just throughout there, like, messing around. We're probably the worst colonial masters in history. The Brits are the best. They're like, go over there, make money. You pay us, we're fine. Bye bye. You know what I'm saying? And the Americans were always, we're screwing the place up. We've been out of there. We have a great relationship with them. We have great ties with them. And the Filipinos are actually pretty good soldiers and sailors. In other words, when they get the right training and they get the right leadership, which they often do, they're actually pretty solid. The problem is they just never really have the right equipment because they got no money. But that's that. But I do think, when you talk about defense and stuff like that, I want to come back to Taiwan. What's your sense of this of Taiwan and its feel for its allies in the region? I mean, do the Taiwanese think the Filipinos are potential allies? Do they think the Japanese are potential allies? Do they think the Americans will fight for them?
That's a great question. I'd say not with the Philippines. It's sort of baby steps. They thought that coordinating coast guards maybe and having just a little bit, things that are very minor but would be a big step for Taiwan. They think maybe they can get with the new leadership in the Philippines. I didn't see anyone saying that they sort of expect the sea change in Japan to, result in Japan definitely being willing to step up. And I got to say, it seems like any attack from China on Taiwan would be carefully constructed not to accidentally or deliberately hit Okinawa or any Japanese territory. They're not going to make it easy for Japan to get involved. I don't think there's a sense that the U.S. would definitely come to their defense. I think they hope for that, but it's not a sure thing. And my own view is that if you don't have a strong U.S. presence, then that does call into question. You can have we have treaty alliances with the Philippines, with Thailand, with every NATO country. But in the Middle East, they're not so interested in having necessarily a treaty on paper. What they're interested in is having U.S. forces present. That's what makes the commitment real. That's why Bahrain doesn't really worry that much. They worry a little bit, certainly about Iran and all the other bad actors. The UAE too. We don't have a formal base, but we have an informal base of certainly a lot of aviation assets, and same with Saudi Arabia. And so without that, I think the Taiwanese
That's a good analogy. That's good analysis. I think you're right. I think overall, my opinion though is not, aside from the Taiwanese, because I'd be honest with you, I'm one of these ones upset the Taiwanese. I don't think they matter as much as people think they do. In other words, I think the Japanese look down there and they go, okay, this is Yokohama, this is all our Tokyo Bay. This is us going south. You know what I'm saying? And if we're going to go south and then go 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 uh, go west, you know, over to the over to Europe. We got to go through basically by Taiwan. You know, I mean, major container ships, their route is 100 miles off Taiwan, or if they're going to stop in Hong Kong, it's down the strait. You know what I'm saying? The question is, are they going to allow that economic lifeline to be cut? And I think the answer is no. And I think the other thing too is we could sit around all day and hope the Chinese are good enough not to target them. I think we have to understand the hatred the Chinese have of the Japanese. And I think those southern islands get it for sure. And that brings Japan in. Japan comes in, we come in. And I think the other thing too is that what we've seen thanks to Putin and what we've seen thanks to actually Pelosi, in fairness, is the Chinese don't really have the capability yet for this year or maybe the next 7 or 8 years, in my mind, is a long to actually get an invasion force that can get on the ground in Taiwan and wrap this thing up pretty quickly. You know, like I said earlier about the Army screwing up the civil defense, that's going to change. It's already coming along. You know what I'm saying? So what's going to happen is like, can China get across there and really, can China get across there and actually and take Taiwan? I'm not sure they can. I mean, look at the Russians. You know, they were counting on a quick one. The other thing too is people go, well, the Ukrainians are fighters. We don't know about the Taiwanese. Well, the Chinese don't have a great track record either. You know, and they haven't fought either. So this would be a brand new thing for them. I follow a couple of websites, and the way they talk to you, it's like it would be like a video game. It's like, no, that's not the way it's going to be. And the other thing too is the U.S. actually has a lot of options thanks to submarines and cruise missiles from 300 miles off. They got a lot of options out there to basically not put one U.S. soldier in the line of sight. You know what I'm saying? And we've seen that. Another thing too, we've seen that happen with in Ukraine, where essentially, I mean, I'm sorry, you see these missiles being fired at the Russians long term. But you're trying to tell me there's not U.S. advisors close by? You know what I'm saying? That's why Putin's losing his mind. You know, they're out there trying to hunt down American advisors. You know, but they can launch those missiles from very safe areas. You know, and the Russians don't really have the motivated troops to go get those guys. So it's really quite something. But I tend to think you're right. I tend to think the Taiwanese kind of doubt the Americans will come, but I think the more the Taiwanese prepare to fight, I think the more likely this will come.
Yeah,
You know,
and that's the key thing. It's a bit of a chicken and egg, but if it's not I don't think it's the case where the more we become involved and say we'll be involved, that the Taiwanese will be, oh, great, well, they're taking care of it. We don't need to do anything. I think they've gotten to a tipping point where they are determined to spend more and do more. They could always do a little more than they are, but and that'll be actually reinforced if they have a sense that we'll be involved, because it won't seem like a hopeless cause.
Yeah, I was hope that Pompeo and all the people and all the Americans who show up in the future, I would hope they would help the administration, the civil authorities, overcome the objections from the military for civil defense. In other words, I would hope that somebody would take up, Wolfowitz has talked about this for years. All right, what we're going to do is we're going to pre-position 50,000, 60,000 rifles, 40 or 50,000 20,000 anti-tank weapons, some Stinger missiles, you know what I'm saying? And we're going to train a territorial defense force of 50,000, 60,000 people who will fight. Find the guys, pay them some money, and they'll, in addition to the army. And I think Taiwan is not a big place. If the Chinese have to come ashore and you got to fight these guys who are willing to fight, those types of things naturally attract guys who want to fight too, by the way. So I'm just not as pessimistic about Taiwan now as I was a year and a half ago, and it's because I am fairly more optimistic. But we've got to continue to see real things happen. That's the thing there.
All right, that's all the time we have for this episode. But join us again soon for another edition of Simon and White. Thanks.